Detroiters have seen a lot of history and growth since 1910, and Detroit families have been served by R.G. and G.R. Harris Funeral Homes during the entire 100 years. The Harris family were early immigrants from England to Canada, where they flourished as expert harness makers in Tillsonburg, near London, Ontario. Mr. George R. Harris came to Detroit in 1879 and later became credit manager at the Detroit Free Press. That same year, George R. Harris opened an account at the Detroit Bank. Thomas Alva Edison invented the incandescent lamp, and Belle Isle was purchased by the city of Detroit. The Harris home was on Washington Boulevard, and Harris's livery stable has since been replaced by the Detroit Edison building. In 1910, Robert G. Harris opened the first Harris Funeral Home by hanging a sign on the family home on the Near East Side, near the present Detroit Art Institute. He was a dedicated young man of 18 who already firmly believed in the future of Detroit and the importance of respectful and reasonable funeral service. 1912 saw the first automobile produced by the Chevrolet Motor Company in Detroit, and Robert G. Harris moved his funeral home to this imposing building, the old Haste Mansion at Alexandrin and Trumbull. As the city grew, more and more families came to depend on the understanding, reasonable service of the R.G. Harris Funeral Home. In 1915, George R. Harris joined his son in the business to form the R.G. and G.R. Harris Funeral Home. At that time, R.G. Harris claimed the distinction of changing clothing styles for undertakers, from the traditional Prince Albert to a mourning suit. Harris was one of the first funeral homes in the country to dress its entire staff identically in dark business suits. According to Robert Harris, this uniformity promoted appearance, dignity, and propriety. 1917 brought the war to end all wars, but it also provided a giant opportunity for Detroit industry, post-war prosperity. In that year, Flora Vossler, formerly of Buffalo, New York, agreed to become Mrs. Robert G. Harris. In addition to her responsibilities as wife and mother, Mrs. Harris later accepted the duties of secretary and treasurer of the growing enterprise. She later became one of the first women to be licensed as a funeral director and embalmer in Michigan. By 1920, Detroit's identification as the cradle of the world automobile production was firmly established. That industry and the dynamic spirit of its leaders had provided Detroit with the highest standard of living in the entire world. In 1930, R.G. Harris became very ill and was away for 1 year. His recuperation period gave him time to formulate the advertising program which brought the major success to the business. It has been the constant policy of Harris Funeral Homes from the very start to strive for reduced funeral costs as an economic protection for the family. This ad of the early 1930s makes this policy clear. Steady growth led to larger space requirements, and in 1931, the R.G. and G.R. Harris Funeral Home was moved to this larger building on Cass Avenue near Canfield. It would remain as a busy funeral home for many years. Because of a changing downtown in the 1980s, it was sold to Wayne State University and is currently being used as a fraternity house. In 1941, the second Harris Funeral Home was opened for the convenience of Detroit's many East Side and Grosse Pointe families. It is located on Harper Avenue at Lake Point and is still in operation today and is being used as the business office of the Harris Funeral Homes. In 1954, the size of this beautiful colonial building was doubled. The Harper Chapel, which had 2 fine organs, was one of the largest establishments of its kind in Michigan. Thomas L. Harris, representing the 3rd generation of his family to be active in this community service business. Mr. Harris and his growing family lived on the east side so that he could be available to families served by the Harper Chapel. In 1948, Harris Funeral Homes instituted the first flying funeral coach service for bereaved families. This Beechcraft Bonanza was especially fitted to return a deceased from any part of the United States. Thomas Harris was a licensed pilot. Around this same time, Clarence Ross, better known as Casey, husband of Roberta Harris and R.G.'s son-in-law, came into the business. A West Side resident, Casey was available to every family in that area requesting his assistance. Unstinting personal service to the bereaved family is the cornerstone of all R.G. and G.R. Harris policy. In 1951, the 3rd Harris Funeral Home was opened at West McNichols Road in Louder. serving families of Detroit's burgeoning West Side. Soon, even this large building proved inadequate. It was enlarged to twice the original size in 1956. With his uncle and his father as his mentors, in 1960, Thomas Rost, Casey's son, became the fourth generation to continue the tradition of trust the funeral home carries out to this day. In 1965, the fourth funeral home was opened in Livonia to serve Harris families in suburbs west of Detroit. 1970 saw the opening of the fifth funeral home in Garden City that would serve the communities of Garden City, Westland, and Dearborn Heights. In 1985, Tom Ross continued the spirit of pioneering the recognized needs of families interested in low-cost yet dignified cremations by starting the Cremation Society of Michigan, again following in the footsteps of his grandfather and leading the industry in innovation. In the late 1990s, Tom's son Matthew became the fifth generation of Harris family members to join the continuing family-owned business. Along with bringing in the new millennium, Harris Funeral Homes became a dignity provider, putting in place value-added services such as the 24-hour compassion helpline, bereavement travel service, and nationwide portability of pre-arrangement services. Dignity also provided public awareness programs like Escape School, which is an interactive presentation made to elementary school children, training them to avoid and get away from abduction situations, and the Smart and Safe Senior presentations to help senior citizens to stay safe. In 2007, history repeated itself as Tom and Nancy graciously hosted the Detroit convention of the Preferred Funeral Directors International, which was originally founded by R.G. Harris himself. Seen here are pictures of the group taking a tour of the Livonia Chapel. As we enter the second decade of the new century, we continue to perfect and embrace technologies with things like updated and informative websites, online obituaries with social networking features, funeral video recording, funeral webcasting, and celebrant services, just to name a few. As we have just witnessed, 100 years has brought about many changes, but one thing remains a constant: the commitment of compassionate, outstanding service that continues to set R.G. and G.R. Harris Funeral Homes apart from others in our communities.